Do not adjust your digital device. What you are about to see and hear may shock and appall you. Join our hosts as they encounter countless thrills, spills, chills, and hilarity as they explore the very weirdest in pop culture. The following media is so strange, so beyond the scope of what is normal, it will make you ask the question, why does this exist? Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Why Does This Exist? I'm Chris.
And I'm Rob.
And today we're going to be discussing a video game series that is near and dear to our hearts. It's one of my favorite video game series. It's also probably my favorite my favorite PlayStation game for sure, or my favorite PlayStation series. About a little Lombax and his robot pal. We're going to be talking about Ratchet and Clank today. But before we get into that, we'll just get into our quick spiel. This is Why Does This Exist? We are a podcast that talks about the very weirdest in pop culture, no matter what it is. If it's a video game like we're about to do, or an obscene pro wrestler that, will stab you in your sleep, and then his ghost will stab you now that he's dead, like New Jack, who we talked about last week. And we've also, anything else really that's happened, we'll talk about it, like card games, like we did when we roasted Magic the Gathering about a year ago, and also anything else of that nature. If it's weird, we're going to talk about it, we're going to have a good time, and you're going to be here along for the ride. But if you want to support us, that would be really great. You could do that a number of ways. The easy way is to just simply listen to us and tell other people and give us ratings and reviews and say we're a good, wholesome bunch of pals. Or you could give us money. The best way is to give us money. You also can go to YouTube and do all of the things, and just subscribe is nice because we'd like to get to 50 and then 100 and then 1,000,000 so that we can just make money all the time. That's it. We just want to make money all the time and buy our own tiny island. Is that so much to ask? We want a tiny island and a swimming pool with a gold rod like Master P. Is that so much to ask? Anyway, money. You could do that by buying coffee for us. That's Buy Us Coffee. buymeacoffee.com/whydoesthisexist. You can also support us on Spreaker. They have a support thing. It'll be in all of the descriptions, like all the other stuff. Or you could go on to patreon.com/whydoesthisexist, and you can subscribe. If you give us money, then we'll let you into the Discord server where you can hang out with us and you can give us some ideas, talk to us, tell us what's good, what's bad, or you can we might even put you on the show. How's that? Anyway, if you want to tell...
Deal.
Well, I'd buy that for $1. So you could also just email us at whydoesthisexistshow@gmail.com and tell us how we're doing. Or if you've got a product that you would like us to sponsor, we are whores. So we will hawk your product no matter how faulty it is. We take no responsibility or liability for any damages that may or may not occur while using said sponsored product. The views of the product sponsor are not our own. That's the news. Here's the weather. You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge from a ragtag group of rogues. So let's get on with the goddamn show. Why don't you tell the good people what Ratchet and Clank is for the unindoctrinated?
So, Ratchet and Clank is a action-adventure platforming game / third-person shooter that was developed by Insomniac Games. Insomniac is famous, probably most famous at the time at least, for that the first Ratchet and Clank came out for the Spyro games on PS1. And I think Insomniac at this point, I believe, is kind of like PlayStation's like in-house or Sony's in-house development studio. Uh, it's part of PlayStation Studios now, but at the time, I think it was an independent studio that they were just like contracted exclusively with Sony. So they did the Ratchet, they did the Spyro series, the first three at least, which are arguably the best. We had talked about Spyro previously on the podcast. Um, and so Insomniac was responsible for the first three games, which were the best ones in the series. Um, and I think we delved into Insomniac a little bit when we did our Spyro episode, so I'm not going to get too much into the studio itself. But in 2002, for the PlayStation 2, they developed the first Ratchet and Clank game, which they had started. They after the third installment of Spyro, they wanted to move to a new IP. So they and the PlayStation 2 had been out and announced at this time, so they decided to start making another video game and turned into Ratchet and Clank.
Yep.
Um
They were making two, and they were trying to figure out what exactly they wanted it to be. One was called Monster Night, in
yep.
which they kind of abandoned it pretty quickly, and then they did another one called Girl with a Stick, which was kind of going to be Zelda and Tomb Raider. And after about 6 months, it just wasn't working out, so they scrapped that one too. And weirdly enough, the chief creative officer, Brian Hastings, he just pitched this idea, and he was like, hey, what about an alien that goes from planet to planet getting weapons and gadgets? So this takes it from basically this is inspired by Spaceman Spiff from the Calvin and Hobbes
Yep.
cartoons, as well as Marvin the Martian, and they kind of ran with that. So if you'd like to learn more about Spaceman Spiff and Calvin and Hobbes, you can listen to that episode at some other point in
Yes.
time. Um, and they decided, hey, let's do this. They liked it. They were gonna they went from all these other designs, like Ratchet was gonna be like reptilian, and then they were like, oh no, there's too many like reptilian aliens. Let's not do that. And then they were like, what about a giant cat?
Yep.
So they got the Lombax, which is what Ratchet is. And then they were like, oh well, we should give him like a little. We should give him a companion too. So they went with a little robot, because what else would you do? Um, and it kind of turned into like a buddy cop.
Yes.
So they like kept that. So they got that mechanic going, and they put together these wonderful, wonderful games, which would not be anything without the voice actors. Like the
Yep.
voice acting is probably the best part of the game, other than blowing everything up.
Yes.
Um, and you gotta like without the voice acting abilities of James Arnold Taylor as Ratchet, and also over what the heck is his name? I have it like I have it on
David
the tip of
K
my
is
tongue.
Clank.
Yes, David K is Clank. Thank you for saving my ass.
Yes.
Um, just without the two of them, you don't have you don't have a game. Which also that's a lie. You have Kevin Michael Richardson as Chairman Drac, who is brilliant,
Mm-hmm.
um, and hysterical, and you've also got the fellow who is Captain Quark. I'm blanking on him too.
Jim Ward.
Yes, Jim Ward. Thank you very much again. There, it's the perfect silliness that comes in there, and then you have like cameos from other like well-known voice actors too. Like I think in the second one, Rob Paulson shows up for a minute as like the hippie alien.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's they all deliver such great performances, and they have such great chemistry with each other that like everything feels totally natural. And well, once they get to the movie, I really like the movie too. It like say what you will about it. Some people are like mixed on it. I really loved it. Um, but yeah, these games are absolutely brilliant with the voice acting and the and like the cutscenes, and it really pulls you into
Yeah.
the story, and it makes you fall in love with the characters right away. Um, and the humor, like
Yeah, it's
it's
quite
just
funny.
it's written so
Very well written.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah, like all of the jokes are like fast. Then they're like juvenile humor, and it's really funny.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
mean,
it's
a
and
perfect
it's been
example
consistent.
is one of the best weapons in the game is the rhino, and you figure out it's spelled RYNO, and when the guy like you get it from this guy who's like this shady kind of dealer on the street almost, and it's like really expensive because it's like this really good rocket launcher, and he's like telling you what it is, and it's like, oh, it's because it's like rip you a new one is what it's actually
Hmm.
called. So it's like that's why they call it the rhino, uh because it's like just like this ridiculous rocket launcher. So it's like it's like silly kind of humor like that, but it works well. It's really well written. um Gameplay wise, it's not a traditional platformer. If it almost has elements of like Metroidvanias kind of sprinkled in, because maybe not the first game was, I think, a little bit more straightforward and linear, but some of the later games had you going back and forth to the different planets. Like once you unlock a new gadget to go back to a planet you couldn't get, and access an area that you couldn't get to on a previous stage with that gadget. So it kind of had that like Metroidvania feel to it. Um, and the later games, the levels got bigger and more wide open with more branching paths and stuff like that, as opposed to the earlier games. So it kind of did really expand on just like the platforming genre in general. It wasn't just like a straight up platformer like Spyro the Dragon had previously, or some of Naughty Dog's games like Crash Bandicoot. So that was interesting, and this was really like the golden age of like platforming games, the late 90s to the early 2000s. So to really get ahead, because there was so many out there, you really had to do something innovative, and I think Ratchet and Clank was able to do that because of that kind of like Metroidvania aspect to it. And also the amount of weapons in the game is just out of like, you know even the first game had a bunch, and then like they just kept like building on it for the subsequent sequels. The arsenal that you can get, it's just
Right.
like out of
And
control.
I love how the weapons can self upgrade. Like you don't have to
Yes.
pay for an upgrade. Instead, it just naturally progresses and it gets stronger the more that you use it.
Yeah, they kind of changed that a little bit for like the remake. In 2016 they released a remake on PS4. And it was more of like a reboot than a straight up remake. It kind of like combined elements of the first game along with the second game, um, and kind of mashed it together, and the storyline was a little bit different than what it previously was. It kind of followed like a basics. From what I understand, I believe the 2016 remake follows closer to the plot of the movie, I believe, than
Oh,
the
that makes
actual original
sense.
game. It's actually really good. It's
Well, I
still
think
good. It's
in
not
I
terrible.
think well, I think the movie came out around 2016, so that would make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but it's actually a really good, like very well done reboot of the series.
Yes, I've played it at your house. It is good.
Yeah. And
Like
the weapons are again like they really like went all out with the different weapons and stuff like that. And you start out with kind of like some boring ones, but then like as you progress you get like better and better weapons that do like more interesting things. And that's always how like been like kind of like the Ratchet and Clank formula is like you start out with like basic, like, okay, here's like a machine gun, or like just like a regular shooting gun. Plus you always have the wrench,
Mhm.
which is like your melee weapon, which is quite useful also. And and then you upgrade to you get like a flamethrower, and then like all of a sudden like you're getting rocket launchers and grenade launchers and all kinds of cool stuff like that later on in the game. So that was always a good fixture of the Ratchet and Clank series, was like the arsenals that you can develop over time.
Yeah.
A-
And on
And
top of that, it helps like it's one of those games where like it might be get like the difficulty might be getting harder as the game progresses, but you're having fun
Yeah.
all the time. It is not like a super difficult game. I mean, you can get it to be that difficult if you want to play that hard, but like generally it's not an incredibly difficult game where it's frustrating. Um, it's always a lot of fun, and because you're obtaining so many weapons that do so many different things, that you and like that they're constantly upgrading themselves, that it doesn't it's one of those games where like where like you kind of level up with the difficulty, so it doesn't feel that hard as it's like as you're going through the game.
Yeah. Yeah, it there's definitely like
Like it's a natural
progress.
progression.
Yes, that's what I was the word I was looking for. Like you know, run into harder and harder enemies as you get into the later levels, but at the same time, you also have the better weapons that could like do way more damage to them. So you don't really ever feel like it's like unfair or too hard because you always have that balance. Um, so you had the first game, and then of course the second game was Ratchet and Clank Going Commando. Um, and
I love how I love how every couple of games it's like a really funny innuendo, like the title of
yes,
every few games you get one.
yeah, you had Going Commando, and then Up Your Arsenal was the third one. So the first three were the ones that I obviously grew up playing, and I kind of stopped after Up Your Arsenal. Up Your Arsenal was interesting is that it added a multiplayer aspect to it, which they expanded on in the next game in the series, which was Ratchet and Clank Deadlocked, which kind of almost was like a strictly like arena combat kind of multiplayer game. Like I think it did have like single player, but it was trying to focus
Yeah, it
more
did.
on the multiplayer aspect.
No, you're thinking of I think All for One was the multiplayer. What was like the more multiplayer oriented. I believe they did have a multiplayer mode in Up Your Arsenal in Deadlocked, but it was like it wasn't like a core component of the game where I think All
Okay.
for One you could tag people in and that didn't happen for a while. It may have been full or it was either All for One or Full Frontal Assault, but it was one of the later ones. Um, but Ratchet Deadlocked was interesting. I like because it was just Ratchet,
Yeah.
like where he's going into the gladiator games, I believe is what it is, and he's like fighting. No, he's like imprisoned and he's like fighting for. He's like doing the gladiator games to like fight for his freedom essentially, and all of this is happening because like Clank in the like during Up Your Arsenal or something because they've become like quasi celebrities in the galaxy
Yeah.
from like just saving the world multiple times. Secret Clank ends up getting like his own like TV series called Secret Agent Clank. So which is just a really funny like nod to Get Smart,
Hmm.
and he's off filming Secret Agent Clank when all of this Ratchet Deadlock stuff happens. So Clank just isn't there and has no knowledge of what's going on. But you also got the companion game, which I think may have been for the I think it was for the handheld PlayStation game. Yeah, the PlayStation Portable,
Yeah.
and they did eventually like get a PS2 port, but Secret Agent Clank is essentially your Secret Agent Clank. Like
Hmm.
you're by yourself doing whatever mission it is that you're doing. Um, but yeah, Deadlocked was an interesting one, but people enjoyed it even though it was like just Ratchet. But you get there's so many villains that you get in this series as well that
Yeah.
really like they help make sure that it's never boring. Um, like for a while, I had only played those four because I ended up having Nintendo consoles after like 2006, like after the PS2 went away,
Hmm.
and the PS3 took hold. We kind of just had this. We kind of were like more of like a one console household for a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah.
So whatever we had, and then if we got the other one, then like that was the console that we were going to stick with for a while. So, and it was usually the cheaper one.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have two siblings, so we went with the Nintendo stuff because the Nintendo stuff was always cheaper. Um, and so we didn't have the PS3, so I didn't get to play f- any of the future games for the longest time, and I only recently started like playing all of those again, and like playing them for the first time. Like my brother-in-law got me, he like gave me his old PS4 because it was just sitting there in the house,
Mm-hmm.
maybe like maybe like 8 months ago or something like that. And the first thing that I did was just play all of the Ratchet and Clank games that I missed that I was able to finally play. So I got through Future. You like so villain wise, the first villain is Chairman Drek, right? And
Yes.
who like there's this big company Megacorp that is essentially the conglomerate that runs the world. Well, that runs the entire galaxy, where it's like this giant monopoly thing where like everything is owned by Megacorp. It's basically the universe's Acme,
Yeah.
and he's the CEO of that company, and he's destroying planets to like create a giant new planet, and he's terraforming and everything, and then you got
He's
to stop
basically the
him.
Spaceballs.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and then you get Doctor Nefarious, who is just like a robot, who's just like he's an evil robot who is absolutely lost it, and he's just hell bent on like total annihilation just because. And he hates Ratchet and Clank because they, of course, are the foil to his plans.
Yeah.
Um, and then Doctor Nefarious kind of goes away for a little while, and then you get the space pirates, who who ends up becoming the main protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell is his name? Blackwater, Captain Blackwater. And then and then you slowly, it somehow goes back into Doctor Nefarious,
Yeah. So
into I believe a crack in time, and then you end up going into the Nexus where you get this new batch of like villains. And I don't think that I had, and I haven't played Rift Apart. That's the only one that I haven't because they don't have that's not available for the PS4.
mm-hmm.
And you do also find out more into the Before the Nexus stuff about where Ratchet came from a little, like, and like who, like, you end up meeting someone who knew his father.
Yeah.
And it's interesting on like how Ratchet's story develops over the series of every game.
Yeah. They kind of
Like he
changed it
has
around a
very
little bit
full arcs.
in the reboot. So in the original series, in the first game is when you face off against Chairman Drek, and then Doctor Nefarious is the main villain of the third game. And in uh in the reboot, you actually have you're against both Doctor Nefarious and Chairman Drek. So
Oh,
like it
that's
kind of
interesting. I
yeah,
never finished that one. I
yeah
only played it in your house.
it kind of like combines elements from all three of the original trilogy into one, because you have whereas in the original Ratchet and Clank, the first game, Ratchet was kind of just on his own, like basically like just doing his like little quest by himself, and then later on kind of joins the Galactic Rangers. But in the reboot, you just join the Galactic Rangers right away. uh and the Galactic Rangers is like run by Captain Quark, and obviously you find out he's like, in the first game you find out he's a scumbag, and he's like a fake, and he's basically just like a spokesman for Chairman Drek, and he tries to trap you. But like he kind of remains like this, like, I don't want to call him like a full-on villain, because he's really not. He's more of like a bumbling idiot that kind of is just there, and he sometimes is against you and sometimes is allied with you. And he's like supposed to be like that archetypal, like everyone thinks he's like this big celebrity and hero and stuff, but he's really just like a loser. um Kind of like Zap Brannigan from Futurama, where
Hmm.
he like has this bravado and like makes himself out to be this like superhero, but turns out he's just like a fat guy in a suit kind of thing, and he's really just like a loser and has no problem betraying people, and and doing like less than reputable deeds.
Yeah, and on top
So
of that, he like doesn't really want it. Like basically, he like presents himself as a big hero, and he never did any of those things.
yeah, yeah. And he like often takes credit. Like that's like a big running gag in the reboot is that like basically the Galactic Rangers are like going on all these dangerous missions and like fighting against Chairman Drek and Doctor Nefarious and all that, and like basically Captain Quark's just taking all the credit for it, even though like he's
Hmm.
not even on the missions basically. So it's like
And for some reason, they believe him.
yeah. So that's basically, and he's like a source of like comic relief throughout the whole series because of like how much of a loser he is,
Hmm.
and he's just like his like plans to like always end up getting foiled and blowing up in his face, and it's just funny.
Yeah, and
So
I mean another fun running gag that they have is Thugs for Less, which is basically the
yes,
Pinkertons of the universe, where they just hire they're like the hired goons that like are just a bunch of morons.
yeah,
It's it's fun. You also have Tachyon, who is another villain that's just obsessed with just he's obsessed with destroying the universe as well, and he like he's interesting in his own because he should have been stomped out, and they ended up taking and like the Lombaxes ended up taking care of him, and he like rose up to destroy the Lombaxes.
mhm,
But yeah, Tachyon is an interesting fellow as well, and I like how they can go. I like how they shift between all of these different villains, where like it doesn't feel stale, and you're not just fighting the same villain over and over.
yeah,
Like they and like they write them out where they can disappear for a while, and then something else is just waiting there because they didn't quite have an ending there as well. Like they write them off in a believable. They write them off in like in a way where you don't forget about them, but they take like a little bit of a bow,
yeah,
and they don't and it doesn't feel awkward when they're making way for somebody else to come in. Like there's nothing unfinished.
yeah,
And you do also have the Zoni, which pop up um, a little bit more in like tools for this in tools of destruction, where that's their, and then that's where you start to figure out a little bit of where like Clank came from too. So they do a lot to flesh out these characters so that you care about them, and they keep expanding on that in each game where you love these characters even more and you want to learn more about them, and they don't just like they tell like they keep giving you just a little bit, but they don't give you the whole thing, so that they leave room for themselves to write in more, and I always liked that.
yeah. I liked another gameplay aspect that I always liked too was this was more in the later games also was the flight, like there's like certain levels where you get to actually pilot the ship and like, have dog fights with all these, enemies and stuff, and that was always a really cool and fun thing to do. And that, again, that wasn't like something that was like common at the time when these games were coming out. Like, there was a couple of games like that, but like and it was more of like just kind of like a mini game. Like it wasn't like the primary focus, but it was like a fun little add-on. It was always cool, the space themed. It felt really fun, and like the sci-fi aspect to it. It was like all really, you know, it was just cool. The ships that you get, like you eventually like get to upgrade your ships to different ones and stuff, and they're like really cool looking. They're really sleek, and they look like something out of Star Wars or something like that. It really makes you feel like you're like this space pilot traveling between planets and stuff. um
Right, like they do a great job of immersing you in that world, and they like
yes,
there's just great world building in the games
yeah, there is.
in general.
And the planets are really like unique. There's like a lot of different like environments that you go to. Obviously, they have planets that are themed around certain things. Like there's one that's like more of like an all water planet. There's one that's like kind of like a lava planet or something like that. But they like are really well built. The level design is really good,
Hmm.
and it doesn't feel linear. Even like the ones like the levels that are like a little bit more linear that they want you to go in a specific direction, it doesn't feel that way. Um and the planets that you go to that are like populated, like the cities and stuff like that, they look and feel like really like robust and alive. Like you see traffic, like like hover cars in the background going back and forth, and it and even like other planets where like there's a battle going on or something like that, it feels like you're in like a battle and you're like invading, and like trying to like stop this huge like invasion or whatever, and like you see like ships flying around and there's dog fights happening, and all of this is happening like just above your head. You can't really interact with it, but it just adds to like the immersion of it. It makes you really feel like you're like in there, like in the middle of a battle, sneaking around trying to do some missions while this huge battle's going on.
Right, and as you're exploring the world, all these things will happen where you will be able to interact with them, and like the world will change in front of you,
Yes.
and it'll catch you off guard sometimes. Like you'll be well, one of the best mechanics that they have is like the grind boots.
Oh
So
yeah.
you like where you're like surfing, where like you're like you're grinding on whatever surface that you need to, and there's all sorts of stuff happening, and sometimes you're going around a specific, like just a building or something, and then the building will collapse from one of the background dogfights, and like so let's just say like like a stray rocket will hit it and it'll start to fall apart, and then you'll have to go you'll have to like travel down that destroyed building now,
Yeah.
or the world will start or like something else will start like breaking apart in front of you from an explosion that obviously you can't interact with, but it looks like you can, and then that'll be your way of getting up the building into the next level. So it like the transitions are seamless through from like different parts of the world,
Yeah.
and there's also they've peppered in enough other things to do in the, and I don't mean like side quests. I mean like the way that the gameplay goes is nothing is it never feels stale because there's always some other mechanic that you're working with. So for a while you could be walking around blowing stuff up with some of the devices, and you could be you could just be fighting a bunch of enemies. You could be fighting wave after wave of enemies,
Hmm.
and then after that you have to do like you have to do the grind boots for a few minutes, and you have to get to the next part, and then maybe you have to do some kind of like hovering around to try to get to the next thing to go
Hmm.
to get these other objectives, or maybe you get to the hover boots and you have to do, I mean, maybe you have to do like a hoverboarding match or something. You have to get on a hoverboard, or you have to do something else. It's never just doing one thing. You're always switching between multiple mechanics seamlessly, so the gameplay never gets stale. And that's what's
Yeah.
really, really cool. And also, some levels you have to harvest crystals, so you have to run around looking for like nests of like these like giant monsters, and you gotta just like
Hmm.
wipe them out to get enough crystals to repair your ship or whatever it is. So the levels will like, or like maybe you're doing a gladiator game or something. The like they like they build the worlds and the gameplay and the levels out in such a way where it never gets boring.
Yeah, and oftentimes you'll have bonus objectives. So if you have like a little side quest where, like yeah, I said, you have to collect crystals. Well, the basic thing might be okay, collect 10 crystals, and then that's all you really need. But then the guy will say, oh, if you collect 20 more, then I'll give you something special. And like so, if you do that, it's like a little bit more of a challenge because now you have to like push yourself to find all this extra stuff. but then you'll get like a really good weapon or like a cool gadget or something that you wouldn't normally get. And like you don't need it to progress in the game because you've already done like the basic quest. But if you go that extra mile to do the extra part of the quest, then you'll get like a reward. It just feels very rewarding. When you get something new, a new gadget or a new weapon or something like that, like it really feels good. Like you're like, oh, nice, I get to try out like this new thing now. I think,
Right.
especially with Clank in the original game, Clank starts out like, and all you have is like you have like he's got like a helicopter that comes out of him, so you could like kind of like hover jump and like it gives you like a double jump basically, and it works fine. But like later on in the game, you upgrade him into like, and he has like he becomes like a jetpack, and you could go farther and shoot faster, and shoot ahead faster, and it just like it feels really satisfying because it's like you get that visceral like, oh cool, now I have this really cool upgrade because I went from like just like a regular helicopter hover kind of thing to now I have a jetpack. It just feels really fun.
Right. And then in other games sometimes they give you the opportunity to like split up. So like you could
Yeah.
just be Clank for a
Yes.
little bit and you get to control the Zonai, you um or you get all these other crazy powers where like you can fast forward and rewind past versions of yourself so that you can complete the puzzle with them and do a specific thing,
Yeah.
or you just go around like just trying to do like some cool like just some weird like Clank abilities, and it's different every game. Or you're just Ratchet by yourself and you're doing these other things. I always thought that that was really neat that they always did that. Sometimes the Clank stuff can get a little harder because Clank has a lower health bar, so he requires less hits to die.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like another thing that just I like that they can break it up. Like I always enjoyed that, and I always enjoyed the creativity of every weapon. Like sometimes you get the same weapons in other games, but they do very different things when they evolve from one game to the next sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And also I love how it's never just a stock, oh, here are the same games, here are the same weapons from every game. Every game they like the intent is there to create new weapons that they have never made before in any of the games, and that gets harder with each game that they make.
Yeah.
And the fact that they've really that they've really like pushed themselves each time to find 30 new weapons
Yeah.
every game, like that's a testament to how the passion of like the people working on this.
And it's always like a good mix. Like you'll get some like of the previous like the favorites from like older games, and then like also new weapons. So you have like, oh, like I really like this weapon from Ratchet and Clank, like the original. I hope it's in the next one, then it'll be there. But then also like you'll get like a better version of it, or like and then also like a whole bunch of new weapons too. So like it's always fun. Like you get to keep the old favorites, but also you get a lot of new stuff. So like you said, the fact that they were able to design that well is just, it's amazing.
Right. And also there's always a rhino to get
Yes.
in the game, and it's always ridiculous and does something different.
Yeah.
Um but it's always crazy expensive, or it's like hard to get. Like I think in one of them you have to get the blueprints for it,
Yeah.
and you have to collect that throughout the world instead of just paying a bunch of money. That's hard. That's an
Yeah.
extra challenge. You don't need it, but if you can, you're pretty much winning the game the minute that you're fighting the last boss.
Yeah, Ratchet and
Um,
Clank actually reminds me a lot of, and I don't know if it was like directly inspired by, or if I'm sure there was some kind of influence there, but it is very similar to a game that came out on N64 called Jet Force Gemini, which I think we've mentioned on some of the previous podcasts
mhm.
when we were talking about Rareware games, because it was of course one of Rare's classic N64 games. And but it a very similar premise where it's a sci-fi, action platformer shooter game where you get to unlock different weapons. In that, of course, you play as three different people. You're the twins, Juno and Vela, and their dog Lupus. and you go to all these different planets, and like you need different like gadgets to go to different sections, so you're constantly backtracking to different planets after you get new weapons and gadgets, so that way you can unlock new areas. And very similar to Ratchet and Clank, so it actually kind of makes me wonder if like the guys at Insomniac were playing Jet Force Gemini when they were coming up with the idea for it, because it's got that same kind of like feel to it,
I mean, it's possible. There's a little bit of that. You could see the Mega Man inspiration on all the
Yes.
different weapons
Yeah.
and gadgets. Also, in like some of the later games, you can further upgrade the weapons because they'll almost have like a tree, like a skill tree in a way, where like the more of these like crystals that you have, they're like crystals or they're pods or whatever they are, and you could just use these. You could just use up all of these things that are specific to upgrading the weapon even further. So like maybe you have it upgraded to the max, like at the max level of what it'll be,
Hmm.
right? And and then you have this tree here where like it'll add to it'll add to like the amount of ammo that you could have, or it'll add like a shock thing to it, or it'll do something else. And the more you level it up, like obviously the stronger it gets, but it's like there's this other element to it where even just finishing the weapon, like even just like using the weapon enough to upgrade it by itself, it doesn't end there. And on top of it, you can also in the later games you can pick between a few different color schemes that you can choose for the weapon. So there's like more there's like more elements that you could do to making these weapons like your own and perfecting them in the way that you like them to be.
Yeah.
So like it's really neat that they decided to do things like that. But I think the interesting thing is that A Crack in Time was intended to be the last game ever for Ratchet
Hmm.
and Clank. They were going to end it at A Crack in Time, and it feels that way when you do end the game. Like because I remember when I beat it, and I was like, there, there's nothing else for them to do with this. I felt I was like, wow, I mean, I know that there's more games, but I was like, this could have been the ending to the series. Little did I
Hmm.
know that this was supposed to be, and that's why it ended in such like a perfect way. And and of course, because A Crack in Time was so successful, the suits at Sony are looking at Insomniac and they're like, you have to make more of these, right? And they're kind of like, oh, okay. And then you get like All for One and Full Frontal Assault, which they're okay. They kind of like All for One is like the co-op one that we were talking about before, and then Full Frontal Assault had like tower defense things added to it, which is all right.
Hmm.
But they're not necessary for playing any Ratchet and Clank games.
Yeah.
Like you could skip those like if you're looking to play the games that are story driven. Where because like these missions don't have a whole lot to do with the main gameplay. Maybe there's a couple of characters here and there, but it's not like it's not essential to the main plot. Where then they caved, they did Into the Nexus, and then they did the remake reboot game for the to coincide with the movie. But Into the Nexus is also a fun one too, but it's a shorter game. And then they were like, okay, we could like put it on hold for now, and then of course we come to Rift Apart,
Hmm.
which that game I can't get into because I haven't played it,
Yeah.
and I will play it someday eventually, but that is not now. I don't have a PS5. I'm not like my money has to go elsewhere. I don't have a P. I mean, now it's better off for me to just wait for a PS6. But for now I'm okay. holding
Yeah.
off on Ratchet and Clank, but at the rate that I'm going, there'll be like Ratchet and Clank number 50, and that's when I'll get like a PS6, and then I'll be able to play all of the other games that I missed. Or actually, no, at that point it'll be a PS20, and but they'll be up to like the PS42, so I'll be playing all of those games by then, in my 50s, and we'll still be doing the show, and then after that, you'll be, and then 20 years after that, you'll be on the show talking about it with probably your son, and I'll be dead.
Okay.
So
Jesus.
that's. I mean, I'll be. I'll listen. I don't think I'm gonna see 70. So hey, I'm just being realistic here. So well, maybe a tender 69. Hey.
Oh,
But yeah, that's all I got to say about Ratchet and Clank. I
yeah.
mean, I love these games. They are my favorite PlayStation games.
Yeah. Yeah, they're definitely
They're
up there
all
for me too for
they're
PlayStation.
they're hilarious. They always feel fun every time you play it. If you've replayed, and I've replayed some of the older games a number of times,
Yeah.
they never get old. Every time it feels like you're playing it for the first time.
And it just feels like the movement and the combat also it's all very satisfying. It's not like doesn't
Yes,
feel too floaty, it doesn't feel too like difficult. The grappling hook mechanic has always been fun and like very like like swinging around. It feels very good. So it's always just it's got really good game feel, and just it's just really fun overall. There's really there's not much bad you could say about Ratchet and Clank because they innovated in every sequel. It wasn't like it didn't really ever get stale. The even the reboot is like it's great. What they did, they didn't change it enough where it was bad, but like they added some freshness to it as well.
right.
So,
I think
and revitalized it.
the only negative thing that I ever have to really say about this is if the some of the if like is that the shorter games are a lot shorter than the main ones.
Uh-huh.
That's all that I could really say is sometimes the games just feel a little short,
Yeah.
but otherwise I have no issues with that.
Yeah.
Like yeah, I think my only thing is like with the shorter games, sometimes they might be like even though I know that they're supposed to be shorter, they feel a little too short where they don't necessarily have to be their own game, but they could have just been like connected to the other game. Like they could have just found a way
Yeah.
to just add it on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I would say maybe the quest for booty feels a little bit like it's like unused stuff from future, but it's not. But like it's still a good game. It's just a little too short. And so I could say the same thing with Into the Nexus. It is a little bit shorter than I would have liked it to be. But that's really all that I could. I don't. That's the worst thing that I could say is
Yeah.
that the short game feels too short, but it's still a good game. So that should say everything for you.
Yep.
If the negative thing to say is I wanted more game, like there you have it. But a beautiful franchise, lovely games, always fun to play, a stellar voiceover cast, great writing, and they just made a fun world that you could fall in love with.
Mhm.
That's Ratchet and Clank, and memorable characters all around.
Yep. Yep. Well said.
Yep. All right. So we are going to ride off into the sunset, but thank you all for sticking around and hanging out with us for this show. Um, like I said, do all the things on our YouTube channel. Just subscribe, get us to 50 so that we can get to 100 and then we can get to a million and then we can get to a billion and
And then we can retire
all
because
that.
we're making that sweet, sweet YouTube ad revenue.
Exactly. And if you've got a product, why does this exist? Show at gmail.com. We'll set
Hey,
something up. We'll set up something real nice. We'll hawk your gear, or just go to
yep.
Patreon, give us money, and then we'll talk and we'll maybe we'll bring you on the show.
Hey, and
How's that sound?
if you're an indie game developer, or like, you're trying to like do some kind of Kickstarter for a product or something like that, we'll do an episode on it also. We would be,
Yeah.
down to do something like that, and you know try out your product or your video game or whatever, and do an episode on it on the show. So,
Yeah. Tell us
if you're
about your
listening,
weird stuff.
yeah, reach out.
Yep. Alrighty. This has been Why Does This Exist? Thanks again, everybody. This has been Why Does This Exist? I've been Chris.
And I've been Rob.
Now remember, question everything.
Good night, everybody.